Welcome to DAO Deep Dives, where we interview DAO founders, core DAO contributors, and everyone else who works on the periphery of decentralized autonomous organizations.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Super excited to be here today in DAO Deep Dives with Adam and my co-host Solve. We're diving into, the topic of DAOs, this time from a slightly different angle. And Adam will tell us all about that. Adam, who are you? Why are you in the DAOs?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here, Sven and Solve. Thank you. I am Adam Miller. I'm a co-founder of MIDAO, MIDAO, which is a company that provides legal entities for DAOs in the Marshall Islands and more products to come. The reason I got into DAOs is the potential that this technology has to change the way humanity organizes itself at almost every level of society. So the prospective impact of DAOs is just massive. It goes from like families to governments to like international bodies and everything in between, right? And especially companies and projects and software. And so just to me, the potential use cases for DAOs go beyond anything else that's happening in Web3 and are just so exciting.
I love that. Wow, that's already a huge start. So let me just rewind real quick and ask you a question that we actually usually like to ask all of our guests in the beginning, which is, what is a DAO? And not just the normal question about what is a DAO, please tell me the definition here, but your interpretation of the word DAO, what they represent. Maybe from thinking about it so much, you've formed an interesting perspective on what that definition actually is. So enlighten us, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm very opinionated on this. So I'm glad you asked. First of all, I feel like about a year to 2 years ago, everyone was always asking everyone, how would you define a DAO? And people, I think, got tired of it, but I actually think it's still as important of a question as it ever was, because we are still trying to figure out what is a DAO, and especially then, how does it work? So I'm glad you asked, and I think we should be asking each other that question more. So to me and to us at MIDAO, we have a very specific technical definition of what we believe a DAO is. And that is any organization that uses the blockchain for one or more of membership tracking, governance, and treasury management. And you'll notice that in our definition, we don't talk about the social or political structure of how the organization gets work done. To me, I don't care if you have a head chef or a CEO or a board, or if you're using the blockchain to track membership, governance, and hold a treasury. To me, you're a DAO. Now, obviously, most of the work that's being done in DAOs today is leveraging this new technology and what it makes possible to try to create much more democratic, distributed, decentralized structures for organizations, because it's never been practical to do that before, especially on a global scale and at scale in terms of large organizations. So that's really how I would define a DAO. It's really those technologies, and then you go use them however you want. And I don't think every organization in the future is going to call themselves a DAO, but I think every organization in the future is going to be a DAO in terms of them leveraging the blockchain for these things.
I think our goal as a podcast is we're going to do this until we're able to drop the word DAO from the front of our podcast name. And that's how we know we were a success.
Yeah, and I think though it's about 50-50 whether we actually do call everything a DAO in the future or whether we're just using the technology and not calling things a DAO. But I think it could happen, and that's partly because DAO as an acronym, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, is making its way into not only popular culture and conversation as people learn about DAOs like they were learning about NFTs probably 2 years ago, but also it's making its way into laws and regulations, right? Including ours that we've helped work on in the Marshall Islands. States like Wyoming in the United States also are writing this acronym and these words into their laws. So it is also very possible that we will be talking about DAOs for the rest of our lives.
I like that, because most people respond to that work in DAOs in a very different way, which is it's typically a stark contrast where someone will think that we're going to use the phrase our acronym DAOs, but most are like, just call us this. and don't add the DAO name behind it. And we're just an organization. And I liken that to sometimes I'm driving around town and like some little pickup truck pulls up next to me and it has name of the construction company or whatever, LLC. And it's I don't need to know how you formed your organization necessarily. I don't need to know how you are taxed. That's pretty much what that boils down to.
This is an interesting direction we're going. So I think, like, having interviewed a bunch of people from both camps now, I see both points. For me, at this stage of this evolution, I think for me it's important that it is there, because if I would see a truck who has Joe's Plumbing DAO,
Yeah.
I would flag this guy down and talk to him because it's such a new thing. I don't know if
Yeah.
people were so excited in the beginning of LLCs. I wasn't into that stuff
They
at the
probably
time,
were,
right?
actually. I can
They probably were. LLCs were only invented in the 1970s, right? So it's a pretty new thing. And now they're the most popular form of organization. But to Solve's point, yeah, you don't usually care if you're dealing with a corporation or an LLC. But I do think there's an interesting distinction between two sets of language that we use to talk about organizations, right? One is non-legal terminology. I like to call it just like casual colloquial terminology. The other is legal terms, right? And a lot of the words we use are actually in that first category, just colloquial terminology like business. Business does not have a technical meaning, right? It's up to you whether you want to call your project a business or a project or an organization or a group or a club, right? All these words, even the word company, right? Company, it may have some legal meaning, but it doesn't have a legal meaning when it comes to what type of organization you are. You can just decide to call your thing a company or not. It's really up to you. Same with the DAO. And then there are words that do have a legal meaning, like LLC, right? Limited liability company, corporation, C Corp, S Corp, foundation sometimes nonprofit or for profit. And so DAO, I think, actually is in that first category. DAO is just a casual, like colloquial terminology that you can use to describe your organization or not. It has almost no, if any, legal bearing. A DAO LLC, that's a different story, right? Because now we've created something like an LLC that's made for DAOs. So I think it's important to keep track of when someone is using a word to refer to their organization, are they just using a casual colloquial word, right? Or are they using a word with legal meaning?
Man, I love this. So speaking of structure and formation, you really honed in on Marshall Islands. So I think we should jump there and really, there's a lot of um, various jurisdictions that are looking to support in one way or another the concept of DAOs. And what made you hone in on Marshall Islands as opposed to any other?
So a couple of years ago, I was consulting for a friend of mine's DAO, and we were offered $1 million grant from the Moonbeam ecosystem, but we had to have a legal entity to accept that grant. And so we looked around and said, okay, what's a good legal entity for our DAO? And we couldn't find any good options available. Nothing actually met our needs. Now, at the same time, we had been having regular conversations with both government officials and private sector leaders in the Marshall Islands for years about whether there was something interesting we could do in Web3, leveraging the sovereignty of the Marshall Islands to innovate and benefit what's happening in Web3 in the world. So when we ran into this problem with our DAO, we just organically brought it up in our conversation with the Marshall Islands folks and said, hey, how would you like to work on some legislation related to DAOs? And they said, sure, let's try it. And this was probably like the third or fourth idea we had that we tried to work on with them. The first was in 2017, the Solve cryptocurrency, which was people may still be trying to do it, but it's generally a failed project to create something like a CBDC for the Marshall Islands. But anyways, ever since then, we always brought up these cool ideas. And this time the idea actually worked. We helped write a law that got passed about a year and a half ago. And then finally another law just a few months ago that has created the foundation for making the Marshall Islands the best place in the world to register a DAO, and eventually the best place in the world for all digital asset projects.
So this is interesting. I didn't notice actually about MIDAO, the genesis story of MIDAO, but I do want to go back to that, like those earlier conversations, because that's a very unique company and structure you were setting up and have set up and worked with a government, right? Like,
Mhm.
how did that come to be? Did you just pick up the phone and call the president of the Marshall Islands at one point, or what?
It's a great question. And I'll just briefly share a story that, because to me, this whole thing is so crazy too. About a year ago, I flew to Washington, D.C., yeah, picked up some government officials at their embassy, went to a steakhouse for like a schmoozing dinner in a suit. And I was just like, I never thought I would do anything like that in my life. It was like schmoozing with government officials in DC. So it is really interesting. And I think it is pretty unique because there's only so many countries in the world, right? It's a naturally limited, it's a scarce resource, governments and sovereign nations. The way this all went down, I would say actually a lot of it goes back to the fact that people in the Marshall Islands are extremely friendly and welcoming, right? These are like very family oriented, relationship oriented, kind, global people, right? There's only 60,000 of them in the Marshall Islands and 60,000 in the US. And these are the type of people that if you're a nice person, they're going to welcome you into their country, into their families, into their friend groups with open arms, right? And they want to just find trustworthy people that they can do interesting things with. And so I think a lot of our first couple of years working on this really was just relationship building, having interesting conversations, a lot of trial and error in terms of making proposals, finding out whether other people in the government would support it. You know, the Marshall Islands is a democracy. It's a different structure from the US. It's a single parliamentary body with a president. But being a democracy, we are subject to the votes of the senators in the parliament and the government officials that are elected into various positions of power. And we had to get almost all of them on board. And so that was just a lot of conversations, a lot of schmoozing, stuff like that in the early days.
This is super interesting to me as a startup guy. I don't think most people would gravitate towards starting a company that way. I think that's a very unique way. I love to hear it and learn about that.
Yeah, and probably a lot of people have listened to or read Balaji Srinivasan and his book, The Network State. There was also a book from 1999 that laid some of the foundational ideas called The Sovereign Individual. But the idea behind these somewhat groundbreaking visions for the world, the idea is that as the world gets more global, first through like business, right? It doesn't matter whether your business is in the Marshall Islands or the United States. It's just a website, right? In a lot of cases. So starting with business, but increasingly with our personal lives, virtual reality, good flights all over the world, Zoom, family get-togethers. Thanks to all of these trends, it doesn't matter as much where you live or where you domicile your business. As such, it creates a competitive market between sovereign jurisdictions all over the world to try to attract you. Because I don't know if it's how many exactly, but a fair amount of Americans are like, you know what, I'll go move to Puerto Rico because of their crypto laws, right? Or I'll go move to the Bahamas because of their friendly rules, or even just I'll go move to a beautiful island nation because why would I want to live in this crowded city when I live in on a beautiful island for a quarter as much money? This competition that has naturally emerged between sovereignties means that the forces of capitalism are pushing on sovereign nations to innovate. And that's what we're seeing with the Marshall Islands today, with Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, economic zones all over the world. And so domiciling DAOs is just the beginning of what I think is going to be a long-term trend towards changing the nature of sovereignty on Earth.
Yeah, that is awesome. And it brings us toward the question of jurisdictional differences. Talk to us a little bit about the various jurisdictions and the differences you've seen through your work beyond Marshall Islands, in Marshall Islands. What have you iterated on, and how do these relate to the concept of DAOs?
Yeah, for sure. If I go back to when we were looking for a solution, right, for our DAO, and what we saw was missing, right? Because that's what led to a lot of what we tried to do differently. One of the biggest things is that most legal entity types in the world, including all of the ones that like crypto companies tended to use outside the US, all of them are corporation-based structures, right? Some are nonprofits, some are called foundations or vereins, but all of these are corporation-based structures in the sense that they have a board and officers. So like a president, a treasurer, right? By law, you have to have it. And those people not only take on special power over the organization, but also extra liability for the organization. And if you think about most DAOs don't want to have a board, right? Now, earlier I said some DAOs may want to have a board. And so these structures might actually fit for some. But that was the biggest thing, first of all, is that most entities all over the world require you to have a board and officers. And there's one type of entity that already existed in particular that does not require a board, and that's an LLC. Now, LLCs were invented in the United States, popularized in the United States. They don't actually exist in much of the world. The beauty of an LLC is you can structure the organization however you want, in terms of whether there's anyone with extra power and liability or whether everyone is just an equal member of an organization. And so that's the first thing that makes an LLC a good fit for DAOs. But what was the problem with most LLCs in the world is it tended to be the record keeping requirements. So generally there's requirements of keeping written records of meetings, of votes, of the names and addresses of your members, right? And so those are, again, all things that most DAOs, many DAOs, at least today, most DAOs, not going to want to do. You don't want to have to keep the name and address of all your members. It's just literally impossible for most DAOs. And that caused us to say, okay, maybe we can fix the LLC to make it so that it is completely DAO friendly instead of just better than a corporation. And so similar to what was done in Wyoming and now has been done in several states in the United States, but I don't think anywhere else in the world other than the Marshall Islands, was we've created DAO LLCs, which is legally a modified LLC, but it is an LLC. These DAOs that are forming DAO LLCs, they are becoming LLCs, just that they're subject to slightly different rules, such as like not having to keep a list of names and addresses of the members, at least in our case in the Marshall Islands, and not having to have written records as long as you have records on the blockchain, right? The ability to explicitly say also that there's no managers because the algorithm is a manager, right? So that it's very clear that there's no one taking on special power or special liability. So those are some of the key things that make a DAO LLC, especially in the Marshall Islands, unique from the other entities and jurisdictions available around the world.
That's cool. Yeah, it makes me want to ask you about, so there's a few states in the United States that allow for anonymous LLCs. And I wonder if that applies whatsoever to what you've built in the Marshall Islands, and if that's something that could come up at some point as a possibility, if not.
Honestly, I never heard someone even mention that there were anonymous LLCs. So this is actually news to me. I don't know if you know more, you could tell me about them, but is this like the DAO LLCs or something unrelated?
Unrelated, just a basic offering in several states. And it's I'm just pulling it up right here so I can just read you straight off. An anonymous LLC is an LLC whose owners are not publicly identifiable by the state. And so, as you would have guessed, right, the name and contact information of the real members and managers are private, and an anonymous LLC is a separate type of business legal entity. It's where the state's Secretary of State doesn't publish or require you to give the real names and contact information of the owners of an LLC. And that is possible in Delaware, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wyoming.
Interesting. So I would guess with these anonymous LLCs, first of all, I wonder if you're telling the Secretary of State stuff that he or she is just not sharing with others, or if you really don't have to tell the Secretary of State anything. But actually, this sounds potentially not legal in the context of new laws that have passed in the United States at the federal level, which is the Corporate Transparency Act, that requires certain owners of any corporate entity in the United States to have to identify themselves to the Secretary of State.
So I have formed an anonymous LLC in one of those states, and obviously you have to present all of your typical information to the Secretary of State. And then it's just a matter of not publishing that information.
I will say the US is generally a leader when it comes to many aspects of business, including legal entities. Unfortunately, the problem with the US for crypto and Web3 is it's scaring everyone away from wanting to be based in the US because no one knows what the federal government's going to do. So we actually don't spend as much time like researching all the specific options in the US because most of our clients are just not interested in being in the US anyway.
Right. So let me read you something straight out of a press release. MIDAO awarded facilitation of DAO registry process by Government of Marshall Islands. If you wouldn't mind, tell us about this process and some of the challenges you faced by actually going through this.
Yeah, sure. When we first passed a law about a year and a half ago, it was a small amendment to an existing statute that changed the Nonprofit Entities Act of the Marshall Islands in such a way that made it possible to have a nonprofit LLC that removed some of these negative requirements for DAOs. This was not something that everyone in the Marshall Islands was behind at the time. It was like a surprise to a lot of people. We were a little bit surprised that it actually got passed. And so right away, we started trying to register DAOs. And when people saw the paperwork we were submitting, they hadn't even seen this amendment that we passed, right? They had no idea that this was coming. And so there was a lot of, first of all, education and trial and error, and a lot of conversations that had to happen. Really, it's still happening even now, but especially at first, right? It was like, okay, let's figure out how to do this thing, right? Because it's different. And over time, as everyone in the government of the Marshall Islands and many probably of the citizens got educated about what we were up to, and slowly but surely more and more people got on board with wanting to do this and seeing that it wasn't like an untenable risk. As more and more people got on board, things got a little bit more official. We ended up signing a deal with the government of the Marshall Islands that made our company the exclusive private sector partner of the government in commercializing these DAO LLCs and potentially other things that we do with the legislation there. And so that was the middle of last year that we signed that arrangement. Part of that arrangement created an oversight committee that has government officials and owners of MIDAO. And we meet every 3 to 6 months to look at how everything's going, identify ways that the government and we can improve, look at our compliance process and make sure our compliance is solid. And so for the past 9 months or so, it's been much more collaborative to where we really are working hand in hand with the government to try to make sure we're passing whatever legislation needs to get passed to be innovative and compliant, et cetera. Working together to make sure we're meeting international standards for anti-money laundering and anti-criminal, anti-terrorist activity. So now it's much more collaborative. And when we passed our second law, which was just about 4 months ago now, that was actually brought to the parliament by the president's cabinet, not by us or by even the one senator we worked with very closely at the beginning. And so now it's much more collaborative.
So does that mean you have access to the banking needs that you would require over there?
So banking is really a different question. A lot of our DAO clients are looking for banking because they want to be, just like any business, they want to be able to send and receive fiat money, right? Maybe they get a sponsor for an event the DAO is hosting and the sponsor doesn't have crypto. And so that is a big use case. We don't have a solution in the Marshall Islands specifically for DAOs, but we do have banks around the world that have given accounts to our clients. Unfortunately, one of them is one of the two that just went out of business a couple of weeks ago. But so we do help our clients get bank accounts. Meanwhile, we are working on a banking solution for DAOs that probably won't be ready for at least many months. And I can't go into a lot of the specifics, but that will be a Marshall Islands based banking solution for DAOs if it comes to pass.
Obviously, like the goal with DAOs and with Web3 and with everything that we're building towards eliminates the need for banks altogether, right? Maybe that's controversial, but I don't think so. I've been in this space for a long time, and that's what we're building towards. And in the meantime, say you have somebody that's wanting to get involved in the governance of a specific DAO or something like that, and really is looking for an easy fiat on-ramp directly into the DAO, right? Hopefully those will exist.
Yeah, a lot of times we've described our legal entity as a bridge between TradFi and DeFi or CeFi and DeFi or Web 2 and Web 3 because it allows an organization, a DAO, to participate in the traditional financial system, even though it's living outside of that system, generally speaking. And one of the interesting things too is that a DAO not forming a legal entity of its choice is actually choosing through inaction to be a particular type of legal entity. So a lot of times like DAOs don't realize that there is not yet a legal framework that allows for a DAO to be some like new, different, anonymous thing where no one has any liability and no one pays taxes. Any DAO that's not registered with its own legal entity is going to be treated as a general partnership by virtually every government and tax institution in the world, which means there is liability and there is tax liability on all of the members of the DAO. And we're starting to see this become relevant as more DAOs are getting sued by the SEC and other government agencies, that the members of the DAO are liable for the DAO's activity unless you form a legal entity. So it's the space we're in, DeFi DAOs, is being bridged to the traditional world, whether we like it or not. It's just a question of whether you want to build your own bridge that's your own chosen structure, or whether you want to let the IRS or whatever tax institution make that bridge for you when they come after you for taxes on a bunch of earnings.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because are you just defaulting into something, or are you aware? Are you even aware that you will default into this, right? What you're explaining now. And does that matter to you? And that's a recurring theme also in our conversations, figuring out what kind of structure you are, right? Okay, you like the concept of a DAO, maybe you started a DAO, but what kind of DAO? There's, I think, a lot of different kind of DAO structures, and the
Yeah.
purpose very often, in my opinion, determines that. So let's take some of the words which have established themselves over the last couple of years. Are you a social DAO? Are you a protocol DAO? Let's go into that direction for a little bit. What have you seen from the different kinds of DAO structures, and how do you help them through the Marshall Islands setup? Where does it matter? Where does it maybe not matter as much? Where are those borders people should be? Which are those borders people should be aware of? And then why do they matter? There's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah, no, it's good though. And I think, first of all, it's important to say that we're not a law firm. We're not lawyers. Our job is to help people understand our legal entity option. And I can try to help people understand the thousands of entity options in the world, but it's just not practical. So I can help people understand our option and whether it might be a good fit for them. But every DAO that's going through this process should ideally have a lawyer, right? And it's really important because every situation really, truly is different, right? But partly because even if DAOs were all more consistent in structure, it would still be important. But especially because DAOs are so different, to your point, it's important to have lawyers involved. And we can help get lawyers involved too. Oftentimes, like, you just at least ask them if everything's fine and they'll tell you for free, or if they think you need their help, right? And then you can consider whether to hire them or not. For all these different types of organizations, yeah, there are DAOs are everything from clubs like chess clubs, homeowners associations, friend groups doing DAOs to go on vacation together or just organize money together to buy dinner, right? Up to businesses, charities, global organizations, and every type of organization in between. And that could be investment funds, it could be businesses, it could be charities, right? It could be community organizations, it could be sports teams, sports leagues, right? It's so varied, right? Because saying DAO is like saying company, right? But just with different implications, right? So company can be, it's even more than just company, right? So in all these different situations, I would say there's one thing that's consistent across all of them in terms of how to decide if you need a legal entity and then figuring out which one to get. And that's basically, can you afford it? As soon as you can afford to hire a lawyer, you should hire a lawyer. As soon as you can afford to create a legal entity, you should create a legal entity. And sometimes that means creating just a cheap, simple legal entity in Wyoming or Delaware right now, if it's adequate for your needs, because it is practically free. And then you come to the Marshall Islands maybe down the road when you can afford an offshore entity and you maybe have a lawyer telling you should do it. The reason I say that is not because just like everyone should do it, so just do it as soon as you can afford to. It's because when you can afford to, you have something to lose. And so that could mean there's a wealthy founder or member of the DAO that just says, I'm not doing this unless you have the right legal structure, but here's 20 grand if you need it to go do that. Or the organization has enough money. So I'd like to think around $100,000, you definitely should have a legal entity. Again, not a lawyer, not legal advice, but like as soon as you have that kind of money at stake, you should be spending 10 grand on lawyers and or legal entities, right? Plus or minus, to protect the rest of the money and to protect you from the liability of holding money with other people. Similarly, if you know you're going to be big, you might as well do it early, right? Most people starting a startup that's not a DAO, one of the first things they do is they go create a legal entity, but they probably wait until they know they're going to really work on it. It's not just an idea.
Yeah, so that's an interesting direction again from my entrepreneurial mind, right? Because there's a couple of different types of entrepreneurs. There's the ones with the really big ego who believe in themselves, and that's just like buying a domain. Okay, let's incorporate this
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
so this is the beauty of LLCs, right? So I'm German, and I keep telling my German entrepreneur friends that it's like why I love this here. This is for me part of the American dream. like with $50 and 20 minutes online, you can start an LLC. Now,
Yeah.
do you have the best operating agreement in place? Probably not, but the legal entity does exist. And that's one of the things which I love about LLCs, and the ease of use is you do that and then you write your operating agreement. If you're by yourself in the beginning, it doesn't really matter anyway. And then as soon as you bring on a co-founder or a first employee or whatever, you make sure you talk to that lawyer and you write down the rules, like the what happens if shit hits the fan rules, right? Like most
Mhm.
importantly. And so that brings me in a different direction. We see the machine in the middle kind of concepts in certain directions. Even for company formation, we have projects like Kali or Otoko, where legally you can start in those cases, a series LLC
Mhm.
with a signature of your cryptographic wallet. Where do you see that technology going? How do we get to the point where that's just like, oh, we need a logo, and it's as easy as that?
That's an interesting question. And one of the first places my mind goes is compliance, because I'd say the direction that the world is going is towards more compliance around businesses and legal entities, not less. And whatever happens in that world will generally apply to DAOs as well. And so I'm not sure. I'll give you an example. So, like, a bank is not going to give a bank account to a Series LLC created on Kali. And one of the reasons for that is that they know that the people who created that entity didn't have to do anything to create it. They didn't have to go through KYC. They didn't have to prove that they're not criminals or terrorists or something. And so the bank will see that and say, I can't verify that any government actually gave you the right to be a legal entity. And we've had series LLCs try to use their series as a part owner of a Marshall Islands DAO LLC, and we couldn't allow it either, right? They couldn't pass our compliance. There still are good use cases for series LLCs, and it is one of those things that is like better than nothing usually, to start with something, some kind of entity rather than nothing, even if it is a series LLC. I still do think that the direction that we need to go in this industry, just like every other industry, is towards automation and towards better usability, right? Right now, creating a Marshall Islands entity takes 1 to 2 months, and we cannot avoid emails and telegram messages and PDFs and documents going back and forth. And it's definitely not ideal. But again, a lot of that is compliance. Like, we'll provide a document to the government of the Marshall Islands. They might say, hey, can you send more information about this one thing? So how could you do that in a smart contract transaction? Right? You can, but it's hard to build in that level of interactivity and compliance into fully automated systems. But hopefully we'll get there.
And that last sentence was key. I think we might not be there yet, but I think that's kind of an interesting future I could see where it's a structure around ownership of things. It's a structure around the liability of things, right? Because maybe your insurance comes with that wrapper already for you, the car you buy or something. I don't know. I'm riffing on this right now, but that's something where I see DAOs be interesting, because then you transition. Why DAOs are interesting in general, right? You transition from that absolute single ownership to a model which allows way beyond that, right? Think car sharing, all of that. And
Mhm.
everything could be built into it eventually. This is a crazy complicated structure I'm proposing here, but that's a path which would be very interesting to see develop.
Think about how so much stuff on blockchain is wrapped in some way, like a wrapped token, so that you can do more with that token. And we're talking about smart contracts, and we're talking about contracts in the legal world. So I think there is something to be said. I don't think everything will need to be wrapped in a legal entity, but one of the things we do believe at MIDAO is that code is not law. People like to say code is law. It sounds great, and there's some meaning in it, but like, code is not law. For code to have any meaning, it has to have an associated set, like, legal framework. And that could be a default legal framework provided by the government. It could be contracts or terms of use that go along with a token or whatever Web3 system you're interacting with. And so I do think that actually, especially on the blockchain in the future, everything will be wrapped with some kind of smart contract combined with some kind of legal agreement of some sort. And that's actually one of the things we want to build at MIDAO, is not just wrapper for legal entities for organizations, but what is the parallel legal framework that goes along with every smart contract, right? Or at least many smart contracts that are out there. And I actually really think that at some point it might be as common for people to come to us create the legal entity, and then say, now give me the software that actually runs my DAO this way. Versus today, where people go spin up their smart contracts and then they say, let me look for a legal structure that fits our smart contracts. And I think actually eventually the two they'll come together, right? You won't be doing one before the other. You'll be looking for the contracts that you need to do whatever you're trying to do, smart contract and traditional contracts.
Nailed it. I think there's a lot of listeners just like angry and smashing their desk. Code is law, damn it. What that obviously means is the code doesn't allow for certain things to take place. But of course, in the real world, when we have that crossover, which is exactly what you just got to with such finesse, is that there's still laws in this world of several types.
Yeah. Plus, just I think from a human perspective, like ones and zeros, right? Or C++ code, it just doesn't give you context, right? If you're a judge or a jury and people come into your court and say, there's this dispute and here's a bunch of code, it just doesn't mean anything. You might have English language at the top of the code in the comments that says, this is a legally binding agreement. Here's why, here's what it means. And then maybe code is law.
Mhm.
And interestingly, laws can be broken. So it's not even really a perfect metaphor to say code is law, right? Because laws are broken all the time. And then you try to, it's actually the complete opposite of smart contracts. The whole part of smart contracts is you can't break them in the first place.
Isn't it going towards more the problem of enforcement? So let's take the LLC example again, right? So say, Adam, you and I, we start an LLC, we agree to our operating agreement, and then I just don't follow through. Now, if we don't have a ton of money, you actually enforcing that, it's questionable how realistic that is. Whereas, and the smaller the decisions or the smaller the questions at hand that are broken or not followed through on, the less likely it is that anyone is trying to enforce them. And I think what smart contracts are doing is giving us rules which are automated in a way that individual opinion or individual action doesn't matter as much, especially in the early stages. That's where we're certainly young as an industry anyway, where we are together in a DAO. And how often do we have conversations where everyone starts the sentence with, I think? So what I think is that it doesn't matter what you think, and it shouldn't matter what I think either, because that's how we agreed on in to use a DAO and make decisions in that democratic or whatever governance system we agreed to by majority vote, whatever it is. And the enforcement is the computer program versus, oh, they didn't follow through, we need to go to court, then we need to prove that they voted this way or that way and then it didn't happen. That's the beauty, I think.
Yeah, and this is obviously a big rabbit hole. I don't know how deep you guys want to go, but I will say that as excited as I am about smart contracts and the vision for blockchain and crypto and Web3, we're really only automating the financial part of a transaction with smart contracts. And we're trying to go a little bit beyond that, like counting votes, like in DAOs for governance. But if you think about like a service agreement that you'll sign with anyone, you could be getting a haircut or you could be buying a computer, you're agreeing to this like 3 to 5 page agreement, almost none of which is about the price and the transfer of the money, right? It's all about other stuff. And so I think I do think we, in like singularity, smart contracts will be able to control everything, like when we get to the singularity, but that's still maybe 100 years away.
Well, once your hairdresser is a robot, which actually executes the code in the smart contract and then cuts the hair that way, then you can enforce it, right?
And you're made of nanobots that are connected to smart contracts. And so if the smart contract needs to like send you to jail, it'll just turn off your nanobots for a while. But like until then, it's going to be pretty hard. Just like with these sovereignties, going back to something we were talking about earlier, one reason it's hard to leave the United States is because might sound a little crass, but like violence still matters in the world. And the United States has almost a monopoly on violence, right? Especially internally, really both internally and externally. And so it's nice to say, sure, maybe I'll just move to this like random island nation in the middle of whatever, let's say the Atlantic in this case, because it'll be a great life. But what happens when like nuclear war breaks out or something, right? Or America decides to come after you because they don't want their citizens moving all over the world in some dystopian future. And that until smart contracts have a monopoly on violence in the world, we're going to have to bridge a lot of our stuff to TradFi and trad legal and stuff like that.
I think we're at a fork in the road and our options are go down an hour-long rabbit hole about the evolution of humankind, or a question that has been lingering in my head, is there a silver bullet? So going back to Marshall Islands real quick, is there a silver bullet or target type of DAO that you're looking to attract right away to Marshall Islands? One that makes more sense than others at the moment. So this is akin to like finding product market
Mhm.
fit. What do you think is best to go after right away?
It's really global DAOs, and a lot of DAOs are global, right? Many are not, but a DAO that's mostly based in one location, if all of its people and its business is in the United States, for example, which just does exist. There's Boston DAOs, Miami DAOs, Austin, Texas DAO is a pretty big one for maybe the first city DAO. And for these organizations, it really doesn't make sense. Like, I won't stop you, but it doesn't make sense to use a foreign entity because governments like the United States will potentially disregard a foreign entity if it's really just being used by local people to do local stuff. So it's really for the projects where you actually do have people from around the world, like at least two places, but especially more, that now your market is really picking any legal entity anywhere, and no government would argue with that. And so then it makes the most sense to come to the Marshall Islands. I would say also a sweet spot for us is DAOs that actually want to wrap the whole DAO in the legal wrapper. Like, a lot of the big crypto projects, and the reasons for this get nuanced, but a lot of the biggest crypto projects, like take SushiSwap, right? Sushi recently created 3 legal entities, no one of which actually wraps the entire DAO. Right? They're just entities for particular purposes. Maybe one is for the labs development company, one is for the foundation, and one is for certain community members that are core contributors, right? And so when you're doing that, I don't think it matters as much what legal entity you choose, because you don't mind if each of those 3 things has a board, for example, or has to keep written records. But if SushiSwap wanted to make every sushi token holder, I don't actually know what their token's called, sushi, whatever, every token holder actually a legal member of the company, of the DAO LLC, then you'd have to use a DAO LLC, and you want to do it probably in the Marshall Islands.
That's awesome. So what a major protocol to target right away. So definitely going after massive players. So really, would you think then that some of the big players in the space, maybe in the DeFi space, will start looking into Marshall Islands very seriously?
Yeah, we already have 4 of the top 200 crypto projects. I know that 200 is a big number, but I do think some of the top projects will start to look at it more seriously now that it's been around for a little bit over a year. I will say, though, there is I mentioned before, there's a nuanced reason why it's hard for some of the biggest crypto projects to actually wrap everything in one legal wrapper. And the reason for that is taxes. And it's because all these organizations have so much unrealized gains in the tokens they're holding, whether it's their own token, Ethereum, whatever else. They have a 10x or more return because they've been around for 4 or 5 years. And as a result, if you create a legal entity for a group of people, a general partnership, right, that already has a bunch of realized gains in it, you have to pay taxes on those gains at that time. And not the entity, the people because technically there's no entity yet, right? It's just a bunch of people with $1 billion that came from $50 million. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, the IRS and everyone will want them to pay capital gains taxes on that. And if they create a legal entity today and put all that money in it, that time would be today that the IRS would expect them to make that payment. So it's not incorporating is a good solution either. At some point, they're going to have to solve this problem, but that's what's stopping a lot of the biggest crypto projects from actually wrapping their entire project in a DAO LLC.
Are you at liberty to discuss those few projects that have already incorporated there that we would probably know of?
I can mention one at least, which is a Clipper exchange. It's governing DAO, which is called Admiral DAO. And I think Clipper it's like top 20 DEX, probably top 100-ish crypto project. So I think that's the only one I can share, unfortunately.
And in thinking of the one you really want to be able to share but can't, can you tell us in what space they're at? Are they at AMM or?
Yeah. All 3 are AMMs of sorts. Yeah, they're all DeFi. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. For people that are just obsessed with DAOs and not into DeFi much, that would be an automated market maker. Think Aave, think Compound, several large protocols that people use on a daily basis, whether that's for CDPs, collateralized deposition, or whatever.
And so, side note here, if this is interesting to you guys as you're listening or watching this, let us know, right? Put that in the comments because I don't know if I want to tease this right now, but I guess I am. We are working on DeFi Deep DAOs. What? DeFi Deep Dives.
This is a new thing. This is Web 4. Not quite Web 5
Yeah.
like Jack, but this is Web 4.
Deep DAOs. All right.
Deep down.
Hang on, let me come back from this. Yeah, no, so the DeFi comments, if that's interesting to you guys, right? Put that in the comments because we are working on DeFi deep dives as a sister production potentially to this, but we want to make sure to not overwhelm anyone with too much content either. However, it is significantly different from where we would
Mm,
dive into, right? What we would dive into.
mm.
And there's a lot of overlap. I think we could then bridge from DAOs to DeFi DAOs and DeFi organization. Interesting segue here. I do want to ask one more question to something you said. Let me see if I can remember. Yeah, that the unrealized gains you were talking about, and that presenting a massive problem for people who are now considering wrapping the entire DAO is a very good argument to think about this early, right? So if you are currently in the process of starting a DAO or have one but are still early, there isn't a lot of money floating around yet. Consider making these decisions, or at least look at these decisions early so that you don't throw your members into that awkward position to then say, hey, if you want to stay involved, you don't, there is not even a decision, right? It is just what it is at that point. And every single contributor, every single member, I think, correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong, will then be taxed based on whatever jurisdiction they're in because it's a general partnership.
Yeah. If you don't have a legal entity. Yeah, that's right. Yep. And so the market's down now in the grand scheme of things. So if there are any DAOs that have unrealized losses, it's actually a great time to do this. And you could actually have tax benefits for the people involved.
Yeah.
So either do it now or when you get back to par value with when the money was put in so that there's no taxes.
This has been a great conversation. So we really appreciate all your time. I think that it would be cool to find out, where do you think we're going with DAOs from here? 10x where we are now. What does that look like? Maybe a moment for you to riff on where you see this all going and what's the most exciting. And
Yep.
I leave it up to you to provide examples or not. I think that's always fun to go down.
Yeah, I think the next few years we'll see first something very similar to what we saw with NFTs in pop culture. I think everyone will be like joining DAOs. Hey, have you heard about this DAO thing? Or kind of like, have you heard about these NFTs? Have you bought one? And most people won't, but like 10% of people will join a DAO. And it will very much get into the national conversation, and people will be like, this is stupid. Other people will think it's amazing, right? And just like NFTs, I think it's going to be very similar. And that's going to be like the big like gold rush for the DAO industry, because that's where we go from very few people using DAOs, like tens of thousands of DAOs. It's probably hundreds of thousands of people already, but going to like tens of millions, right? And so that's going to be a really big jump, and it's going to be really exciting for those of us working in this space. What has to happen for that to be possible is the technology does need to continue developing at the rate it has been. There's a lot of people building DAO platforms and tools, both on the like back end smart contracts and Web3 interface side, as well as like collaboration. Like, how do we actually collaborate as a more democratically controlled business, for example? And so those tools, like a year ago, just no way a non-Web3 native could have launched a DAO. There's literally no way. Today, it would be hard, but possible. In 6 to 12 months, I'm actually trust the people building this technology. It's going to be ready to where a person who's new to their crypto wallet will actually be able to figure out how to launch a DAO. It might still take a couple hours, just like buying an NFT, but they'll be able to figure it out. Assuming that we get there with the tech and we get to 10% of people knowing about DAOs and joining DAOs and stuff like that, I think that 3 to 5 years from now is where we go to like mainstream adoption, to where like everyone starting a company, for example, will ask themselves, should I do this as a normal startup or should I do it as a DAO? Especially in tech. But I think literally across the entire economy, charities, investment funds, right? Again, families going on vacation as an extended family, they'll at least have heard that some other families like use this DAO thing to pool their money and spend it on the vacation. And they'll think about whether they want to do it too. And then that's when things will really start to blow up.
Entrepreneurs, pay attention. Obviously, we're going to need DAO tooling
Mm.
to a very serious
Yeah.
degree. So if you were in the DAO space and you're an entrepreneur and you're looking or thinking about what you should build, we need more tools, right? And we need to be able to
Yep.
simplify this. I think I was going to round it out there, but you said something that I would just love for you to elaborate on just real briefly,
Mhm.
which is, can you explain to our audience how, really briefly, how a family going on vacation would utilize a DAO in the most efficient way to maximize their vacation?
It's funny, I was debating this with a teenager recently. Usually they're very open-minded and actually very honest in giving feedback. And she's like, we just have dad hold the money. Like, why would we need to pool the money together in a trustless way? And I think she's onto something, which is that there's, I think, families with varying sizes and degrees of inherent trust. And I do think there's probably a lot of extended families. Like, think about 30 or 40 people, right, in a bigger family that's spread out around the country, or even if they're not, right, the family that goes to the same camp every year, and maybe everyone goes, right, and brings their motorhomes or something. And like, they may want to be able to pool money over the course of the year to then spend together once they're actually together, or for whatever purpose. And so I think that's where it'll be more common, is like bigger families, just where there isn't a person that everyone just trusts inherently to hold the money for everyone.
Yeah, I think what pops in my head right away, if you're hanging out with friends, doesn't even have to be a vacation, could literally just be a night out. How annoying is settling the bar tab? Like, we have apps
Yeah.
for this, right? Which try to make it easier. And a DAO might be overkill, maybe to go to the bar with your friends at this point.
Ah, that's interesting.
Go.
But think about how it changes the incentive. Suddenly, you've already paid in, and now you can drink as much as you want without paying more in.
But also, you need a vote on every beer, right? Oh, can I have another
Well,
one?
I was thinking just to pay the tab at the end of the night, like guaranteed pay the tab.
Yeah.
I really do think, though, like high school and college clubs are going to be a really good use case for this, because like today in a high school, if anyone's holding like the club's money, it's probably the team or one of the kids or parents. I think that's just clearly not ideal. And that the kids would probably prefer to hold the money themselves, right? And vote in new members, vote out the members that just graduated once a year. College clubs, probably at most colleges, the college holds the money for you and is like your bank. But again, if the college kids, and you won't need a legal entity for this because it's still part of the university's structure, but I think they'd rather hold their own money than let the school hold their money and be able to control it themselves.
At this time, my
Yeah.
youngest is 1 year old. It's like when she's in middle school and high school, am I really ever going to send her to school with cash ever? Probably not, or at least I wouldn't now, but just because of how like into digital money in general, whether that's controlled by a bank or a layer on top of the bank, or whether that's crypto. But especially, less parents I think will be sending
Mhm.
their kids with cash. So it makes a lot of sense for the kids to be able to have that on ramp and then convert it over to maybe a stable coin or whatever, have that in a DAO, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And plus, it's going to be considered like good parenting. Like already today, parents try to find ways to get their kids involved in making money, saving money, spending money. And I think this is just going to be another tool that provides like more transparency to the kids, because they'll be able to actually see the money on chain, even if the parent has the key or whatever. So yeah, I think that's going to be really big
You
too.
heard it here first, folks. If you want to get into better parenting, you need to learn about DAOs. And
Start the family DAO. Or just even think, if two parents and two kids, and you do a model where three people have to vote to be able to spend money, I think you're actually teaching the kids important lessons about money, about decision making, about family, that just, yeah, you could. It's like people say, Amazon could just build NFTs, and then Amazon could keep track of who owns which NFT, and it'd be easier and cheaper and faster and blah, blah, blah. But I think people know that's fake if you do it that way. And I think kids too, right? They know that, okay, really dad gets to decide what we do with the money, versus this money actually lives on a wallet we all control together and have to vote on. That's a crazy cool, I think, life lesson for those kids.
Yeah, so we could go for hours. Adam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
One more thing, if you want to touch on anything else as a closing words, otherwise Again, thank you so much.
The one thing I would add, since you offered, is just where to find me and MIDAO on the web. MIDAO is midao.org, MIDAO.org, or MIDAODS, MIDAODS on Twitter. And I'm on Twitter at 0xThriller, or for the very Web3 native folks who are on Farcaster, you can find me at The Thriller on Farcaster.
Awesome. That's great. So thanks again for being here. And yeah, we will see you soon.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right. It's been awesome. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
And that's a wrap. Sven and Solve are your hosts for DAO Deep Dives, a podcast about all things DAO. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.